Invest Africa, proudly brought to you by KPMG.
Now, still with me on the desk to unpack this week's topic, the city of Nairobi as an investment destination, is Martyn Davies, the CEO at Frontier Advisory. And in Nairobi studios, Moses Ikiara, the MD for the Kenya Investment Authority, and Jabu Basopo, the country manager for Southern and East Africa at Visa. Now, Martyn, let's start with you in Joburg. Now, from a city perspective, we heard Nigeria contributes about 60% to Kenya's GDP. It's also home to 25% of Kenyans, 43% of the country's urban workers. We mentioned it's a hub for multinationals and businesses, but how do we make sure that the city grows along with its numbers from an infrastructure perspective?
I think firstly, obviously the growth story and the numbers story in Africa, as Jabu was saying, is often city-driven rather than the broader national economy. And urbanization currently in Africa is largely driven, I'd step back and say the 19th century industrialization or urbanization in Europe was driven by urbanization. Now, urbanization is not really taking place in our part of the world, so what's driving the urbanization? It's almost a failure of a rural economy. So by default, cities get bigger and bigger and bigger, but more difficult to manage. And you see that in the insert initially was about the sort of informal, poorly planned sort of housing infrastructure for recent migrants to a city now of 4 million people. But last time I checked it was 3. What it'll be in a year's time or 5 years' time, I'm not really sure. So infrastructure is imperative. But ultimately, infrastructure development is to enable economic activity. It will create employment temporarily in terms of its build, and thereafter will create almost like oxygen is to a body, so infrastructure is to an economy. But one story we're not talking about enough, in Nairobi's context particularly, we all get distracted perhaps or too overly focused on this the Silicon sort of Savannah.
Silicon Savannah, yes.
Silicon Savannah story of IT and broadband, and Kenya's done a fantastic job at that, far better arguably than South Africa, and that's to be lauded.
Does it show in the numbers though?
Well, it's a bit like India. Kenya's a mini India. It's a bit sort of complex, it's politically challenging at times, its infrastructure is very bad, but it's got this fantastic sort of market liberalized, market determined, the IT broadband sort of enabled sector. But ultimately, I think, and going back to my point about urbanization and industrialization, what we need to see here is increased industrialization. And I would argue that from a Kenyan, not so much Nairobi, but a Kenyan perspective, and perhaps this argument is more coastal than it is sort of central for Kenya, is which country in our region is going to be potentially the Vietnam of Africa, i.e. sort of a sub-factory of the Chinese increasingly hollowing out manufacturing machine. And I think Kenya's done somewhat good work around that. The EPZA, the Export Processing Zone Authority, some of which are around Nairobi, some which more coastal. But Kenya, I would argue, of all the countries, even South Africa, in the region, has such an opportunity around light industrial manufacturing. And this is the real economy. This is employment generating, it's value generating, it's FDI attracting, and it's ideally positioned, and it's far more substantive, dare I say, than a very small IT type sector, which is perhaps at times overplayed.
Now, Moses, outside of IT, we also know a big agricultural economy, biggest foreign exchange earner is tea. Now, outside of IT, he mentioned manufacturing. From an investment authority perspective, how much money and how much interest is being pumped into the Kenyan manufacturing sector?
I can't agree more that actually Nairobi is gearing up, and indeed even the 46 other counties in Kenya now are looking up at becoming good centers or bases for manufacturing, because as a country we know the biggest challenge we are facing now is unemployment, high rates of unemployment for the youth, which is not good for the economic and social stability. So manufacturing is really a key focus of not only Nairobi but many other counties, the other 46 counties. I would say that if you look at the infrastructure, as has been mentioned, this if I start with maybe even energy within the next 3 years, we actually the projections are that we are likely to have more power than is going to be consumed, which will create a big surplus, and I think this is going to improve the environment for manufacturing. There are a lot of investors, coming in and also, expressing interest in generating electricity from different sources, from wind, And I think a company like GE is doing that. Others, from solar. So that's happening. Then when you look at, because of the importance of agriculture, as you mentioned, this is a key, backbone of the economy. And many counties are looking at how we can add value by, agro-processing, by adding value to the tea and the other products that we're generating. Infrastructure, true, has been a challenge. From roads, traffic congestion has been a problem, and access to some of the even industrial areas left aside for industries are not accessible. There are no roads that have been constructed. But for the first time, Nairobi, is boasting of a superhighway, which has really created a new optimism and hope in the city. With the new governance structure we have, a leadership team that is, the governor is somebody who has been a reputed CEO, who is known to perform.
Jabu, I'm going to throw this to you. Many people feel that, Kenya is a very calm and centered economy politically. For 3 years out of the year, it's fantastic, it's calm. And then when it comes election time, there's a change in the atmosphere. Now, this year we've seen, a fairly peaceful process with the inauguration of Uhuru Kenyatta. Historically, this has not been the case. And also the president is up for crimes against humanity in The Hague later this year. What does this do to investor confidence? Or is it a case of investors not being risk averse?
I think if we look at the government of Kenya, they've done quite a lot of work in terms of enacting some of the regulatory reforms which are very conducive to doing business, so resulting in a free economy. So that's one of the most attractive elements of Kenya. They encourage openness and for competition. They encourage openness for participation. So from our perspective, I think having those reforms in place, I think they are very attractive for doing business. So our role in terms of payments, looking at the financial inclusion element, we are able to change the lives of people. We see the growth in terms of the middle class, like we say. Kenya is one of the countries with the fastest growing middle class. So we have seen an emergence of shopping malls in Nairobi, and that's already a lifestyle on its own in terms of the living standards of the people. So obviously that lifestyle translates into demanding very innovative products.
Okay, so that means, positive future for Nairobi. Martyn, we have 10 seconds. Kenya is an investment destination, hot or not? 10 seconds.
Yes, fastest growing region in Africa, East African community, 142 million people. It's largely still consumer facing sort of businesses, which my fellow guests have been talking about, particularly on the sort of transaction payment side. But it's got to go beyond consumer facing. No country got rich, no country developed or succeeded by having consumers. It developed through industrialization. More integration, energy, sort of logistics around Uganda, South Sudan, phenomenal opportunity for Nairobi and Kenya. Agriculture, of course, will continue, but Nairobi, I used the word earlier, competitiveness. Nairobi, Kenya have phenomenal opportunity here to be more competitive and become increasingly even more what it already is, the default sort of business destination in East Africa. Every region needs a hub. Nairobi currently is that hub.
Great point to leave.